Oh yeah, go ahead, pump it up. I'd love to catch a firefly that's far away. I see your whole crew staring as I put this beat down. You're like a soup can, I'm like Superman. I saw Veronica, the girl that put you off class, cause you played harmonica in art class. I know you want her to, but you don't move cause you don't have any shoes. You touch a pom-pom, I touch an A-bomb. Aw yeah.
20 nights in the ice is a long time when there's hostels on the hill.
It's not about what they want, you just gotta walk your walk.
Hey, welcome to On the Sensors, where we have our how-to destiny. Today we're going to be talking about breaking into the competitive scene and what you can do to better yourself and better your deck building and run with the proverbial big boys. I have joining me today, you know me, I'm the 86. We have over here Norm, who is a player with the Entourage Gaming group, and I see him around quite a bit. And as well, we have Vika. And Vika is someone, I believe, I see you in the Artificery League. Do you play elsewhere in addition?
Sometimes Entourage Thursday night or Wednesday nights, but since it became Wednesday nights from Thursday nights, a lot less, unfortunately.
Gotcha. So with the introductions out of the way, we're going to get right to it. And I'm going to deflect everything to Norm. Let's start us off, Norm. Tell us what you think. How can you become better?
Well, probably the first thing that one has to do in order to really start making a change is start with a change of your mindset. One is you kind of got to commit yourself to a process. By that I really mean you need to be, first of all, thinking of what sorts of things, doing exactly what we're doing here, which is thinking of what are the kinds of things that I need to be doing in order to get better. How do I practice that? And then how do I reflect upon that and figure out how to iterate upon it to get even better from those experiences? Nobody starts off good in this game, pretty much. I mean, yes, having background in card games is, of course, is an advantage. And you'll note that some of the folks who are of the top tier players have been playing competitive card games for like going on 20 years. I'm pretty sure Vika's like that. I started doing at least a little dabbling in competitive card games back in like the mid 90s. So it's something that, you never stop getting better at. So that mindset of kind of recognizing where you're at, committing to a process to get better, and then iterating upon it to get even better as a result is, I think, probably the most important thing you can do to kind of start yourself off. And so that would be, in my opinion, that's the first kind of meta step to go anywhere. Like, does that kind of jive with the way you think as well?
Yeah, I think so. As far as something like really concrete and actionable, I would say joining the Artificery League is a way to go. I started playing like at the very end of Awakenings, and I played a little bit of SOR, but I hadn't bought any cards. I just, my friends had an extra deck and they dragged me out and whatever. But when I guess when I took a more competitive turn was when I first joined the Artificery League in, I think, season 3. And I guess my experience from that was like the first game I just got wrecked. Like it was against what was it? It was seven. It was Night Sister FN Bala, I think. And I got destroyed and I was cranky afterwards. And yeah, so I don't know. I guess just joining, a more competitive league and taking your licks for a little while and learning from it and not being afraid to, copy top tier decks. Maybe at first until you start to really, I guess, understand why certain cards are played in decks all the time, like why certain cards are better or not, then I think it's a good idea to maybe like net deck or just copy other top decks. Because if you're maybe at a bit of a skill advantage and then also a deck advantage or disadvantage, sorry, for both, then it can be tough. So I think not being afraid of net decking is a good starting place. Yeah, just being willing to sort of take your licks for a little while and not get discouraged. I was really close to quitting after that first one. I don't like losing. I don't. So it was it was a little bit rough.
So I'll throw in. I played Street Fighter a little bit competitively. I did a lot of Smash Brothers competitively, and then just even rock climbing and some other things. One of the things that is common in everything I've done, it's going to tournaments, or like you said, the Artificial League. And you kind of equate it like going to the gym. You don't go to the gym when you are fit. You go to the gym to get fit. It's kind of like joining tournaments. You don't go when you are good. You go to get better, and better yourself.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. So yeah, the notion of just you got to get out there in order to improve your skills is essential. So that's a great point. And you said something that I think is really crucial, Vika, there, which is the don't be afraid to copy. And perhaps we could generalize that into that, and probably use a couple other phrases too, such as, you know, you got to go and learn from people who are better than you. You can't assume just that just by sheer force of will that you're going to suddenly, take every idea that you have about the game and suddenly you're going to just elevate it all. That's not going to work. It's much better to be a student of the game and a student of everybody else around you. It's almost a foregone conclusion, right? That any given deck, like you're oftentimes you're not playing really a whole, like, original ideas are actually a bit more rare than you might think. Don't try to be the ultra original guy off the bat, but rather it would be better to understand why good decks work and why good cards work and so on, than to try and instantaneously jump into, I'm going to be the original hero of, and so on. And that seems to be a common thread, I think, with a lot of competitive players.
I would say too, along those lines, is know if deck lists will be public or not for your tournament. So like if there's a top cut and you're going to see each other's deck lists, then putting in a really sneaky card is suddenly not sneaky because they'll know it's in there. So like, if you decide, like, for whatever reason you're going to play like one copy of Dodge, like maybe you can really wreck somebody if they focus everything, and then you just wreck them, and it's never going to happen if they see your deck list. So I guess that would be another thing, maybe for more specifically for, I don't know, like Worlds or something like that, where in the top cut they're going to see your deck list. Then I guess in that case, yeah, don't try to be as sneaky. Yeah, because it'll work for sure in like the Swiss rounds, but it wouldn't work as well once your opponent knows your deck list.
I think that's even like relative to the meta we just had with Redemption. A lot of people tried to slip in, or a few people did, with acceptable losses. So if you give pirates away, and it's like, oh, I want to kill him. But then, like, if someone knew you were going to do that, or you had that in your deck, then it's like, maybe not.
Yeah. Or maybe that's the difference between a 1 of or a 2 of. Maybe as a 1 of, it's enough to deter them from ever attempting it or whatever.
Yeah. And one thing that Norm said that I liked a lot was being a student of the game, and I'm going to reiterate this and say it really basic. You can, anytime I've lost, or sometimes even when I win, it's great to ask questions. I've had a few times where I've won that someone's a little salty and maybe I don't get anything great, but even from a loss, like, you can learn a lot. No one ever suffers a win. And no one's ever going to walk away, and people usually will help you out if you ask a question.
Yeah, there's a lot to be gained from evaluating, especially if you've got a couple moments after a competitive game to kind of reflect upon, okay, what were the crucial things that mattered here? Why did I lose? Was this an optimal play or was it not? Especially if you can remember the times where you had a bit of like anxiety about the decision that you were making. Those are sometimes things to hold on to and think about, okay, if I had chosen differently, would that have been better or more optimal? Sometimes the answer is no, it wouldn't have been, and that happens. But to be able to objectively reflect upon those things are really important, and that kind of gets into we're talking a bit on mindset, a bit on tactics, and then there's some fusion of the two of them at times, and this is kind of the fusion of the two, because like what happens, how do you make sure that your mindset is right during a tournament as well? It's remembering that even if you do lose, like that's not going to be the end. In fact, it would almost be better if you kind of almost divorce yourself from the the standings, if you will, and go, okay, did I become better as a result of this tournament? Even did I learn something that I'm going to be able to take with me to the next event and do even better in? And sometimes that has to do with just did I learn how to play this deck better? Sometimes it's did I learn how to execute on a tactic better as well? Vika is really quite impressive on how he has all sorts of he's developed a lot of tactics that he repeatedly uses in tournaments, and just in every game really. And I think like that's something that everybody can learn from there.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of in-game tactics. I think one thing that I think is a huge deal that people can do wrong. This is sort of the opposite of what you're saying, Norm. Sometimes
Oh,
you can, or no, I just mean the opposite situation of where like, okay, you lose and you think, what did I do better? I think a lot of times maybe you'll win and you'll be like, wow, I should have lost, except they made a certain mistake. And usually I think that big mistake is not knowing when to like go fast and try and push and get a kill and or get value from someone who's about to die. So generally like activating a character, like knowing when, like if your guy has 2 health left, they could roll out and like, or maybe say your guy has 3 health left and they roll out and they're showing a 2 and you want to remove that 2. It's like, no, if your guy's on 3 health and they're only showing 2, you have to get him in the pool right now and you have to result all of your guys' dice before he dies. Because if you don't, they're going to like take his 2 dice for free, or maybe 3 if he has an upgrade. So I'd say a huge thing is knowing, and the opposite of that, like maybe you really want to play like your death field and you're sitting on 5 resources and you got nothing else to do with it. But if you're going first and their guy only has, say they have 2 characters and one of the characters only has 2 health left, like you have to get into the pool right now and put that guy down and get all of his value out of the way. And then, you lose the single death field die out of it, but you gain their 2 dice, that you removed by killing their guy. But then also being realistic about like, okay, if he's 3 away, if I get in right now, can I get that kill? And yeah, just being realistic, like, well, maybe he hasn't played much removal and you think he's going to have a handful of removal. And it's like, hey, I just can't get there, unfortunately. So go slow, play your upgrade, do your whatever, and just accept that he's going to get full value out of his low health character. But I think that's a really big thing that can be missed and can be really game swinging, is if, just not really properly reading whether it's a time to like go, or if, go slow and just extract maximum value from your dice. Yeah.
So there's an interesting lesson in kind of those examples that you brought forward there, and they're kind of, again, like kind of overarching concepts to understand about how card games work, right? And one of them you might consider to be tempo. And actually, I guess even more meta than that is to perhaps suggest there's an additional thing to just learning how card games work. Is that, again, there's 25 plus years worth of accumulated card game knowledge, if we're talking even just competitive collectible card games, and then even farther back if you want to think about, even card games like bridge or spades or whatever, poker, all these things. You can learn from these types of game theoretic concepts, in order to apply them to what we do now in Destiny. Like things like tempo, that's a really interesting concept in Destiny because of the way in which the whole game is structured, to where we have kind of a starting board and all that, and the way in which we win is by developing the board state in a way that's quite asymmetrical to our opponent. It's unlike many other games, which may start from essentially both of you have an asymmetric board, but you're both essentially starting from nothing, as opposed to this is kind of, you start with something in front of you. So there's even a different kind of asymmetricalness to it. And then of course you could get into the craziness of what happens when you're in a mirror match in this type of asymmetric situation. That's a whole nother thing, perhaps.
Mirror matches. I saw the Han Benthic the other day. Man, I think I was biking Gringo. Ugh.
Yeah, Gringo and I faced each other, and I was on Vader Savage, and he beat me. This was in the I guess the Swiss rounds, or not Swiss, but the 8 games you play over the course of the league to make the top cut or whatever. And he beat me pretty handily with Benthic, and I was just so upset with Benthic.
He was salty.
I was very salty about Benthic and think he should get increased. Vader's losing to him, and Vader's gonna get a point. So where's Benthic at? He should be anyway. So yeah, if you can't beat him, join him. So I basically just copied Drago's deck, and then
lesson learned.
Happened to win mirrors. So don't ever be too proud to just copy.
There you go.
That was a match.
That game was a slog. Oh, that was a slog.
So I'm kind of getting along right here. We talked a little bit about theory and taking a lot of card game knowledge, and we talked about a lot of things, mindset. What about things that someone can practice? That we talked about joining tournaments and kind of being involved there, but I want to take the last few minutes that we have, and someone wants to get better. What can they do? And I think that's an excellent lead-off point. Is watch other games. People record games, they play them on Twitch. There are YouTube videos with several people record and upload to YouTube. I know Game Slayer is one. Watch those matches. If you get one to watch yourself and see is this a good decision? Why did I make that decision? If someone else makes a decision, I would try to weigh that. Did they do the right thing? What would I have done? And I'm just curious what you guys think there.
I think Game Slayer is hard to watch. He is a frantic man with a messy board state, and it can be hard to follow.
Oh,
but he's very good. But it can be harder to follow.
He's quite entertaining, though.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I love watching his stuff.
Yeah.
Moloch 2 is also frantic. If you ever watch his streams, it's just, oh man, let's go to mile a minute. So maybe watch those ones in 3/4 speed or half speed or whatever.
Yeah, but watching the games, is there anything you guys pick up there?
Yeah, I think especially when I go back and watch the matches that I've played, to where I have a little more knowledge, especially if I have the full knowledge of okay, I remember what was in my hand. A lot of times you may not remember, or what may be visible on the stream that you're watching is not full. It's best if you have that kind of the intimate knowledge of what's in the hands, so you can see or either anticipate or study. Oh, I understand why they chose this card to play over a different thing that they did. Those are really useful. And don't be shy about pressing the pause button and thinking it through and going I wonder, all right, what's going to happen here? And there's lots of we have a lot of luxuries with to be able to do this on in the internet in our own time, and not having to worry about really the technology involved in order to study the game better like this.
I would say in streams as well, if you're rewatching a stream, have the chat open, because often players will be kind of thinking out loud, almost well, what if he took this line, or I disagree with this, I think he should have taken this line. You can kind of get ideas from that as well. when rewatching. But for more general stuff, I would say like just in a very general sense, like early on in a game, like you really want to build your board and you do not want to be paying for removal. Like, don't use a one cost removal turn one. It's just not like, even if you don't draw anything to play, like it might not be worth playing at all, just losing that resource. Like maybe you're able to drop 2 upgrades on the start of round 2 and go like early on you want to be improving your board state. You don't want to be removing. It depends, I guess. Like if you're using a Trando who only has 8 health and can pack lots of punch, then play removal right from the start. You don't need to create a board because you've already got a board. They hit so hard. So, it depends, but like uh, in general, like if an opponent pays to remove one of my dice round 1, I'm usually pretty happy. Like it turned my die into usually like a disrupt and a discard and all at ambush because they lost their action. And like, so yeah, just in a very general sense, like building a board is the most important thing early, and you definitely don't want to be paying for like a headstrong round 1. Like that's not gonna work out well for you over the course of the game. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's wise. And you said something there that was interesting, and I think this is something that is lost upon a lot of people until you kind of like enter into the mindset of like, okay, what is the equivalent of what I'm about to do? And so you made it like when describing, okay, playing a one cost removal on a 1 die in round 1 is like, it's almost like you turned my die into a disrupt and a discard. Like you would feel pretty good about that normally on round 1 overall. And like that sort of evaluation of what's happening throughout the game and even how to evaluate a card and its value, uh you know, I Vika does have a really excellent way of an analyzing value oftentimes about cards, and sometimes we disagree. But I absolutely think that he kills it sometimes with the way that he thinks about this stuff, and so entering into that part of your mind to that mindset is really really good, and that's something I would definitely commend anybody to do. And so like in other ways this might matter. For instance, okay, consider like what we could probably come up with a number of good examples, but for instance, evaluating removal over something that provides you damage in the long run is something to kind of be evaluating throughout the game. Is it worth it for me to pay a resource in order to do damage, or is it better for me to use this resource to mitigate damage or accomplish something else? Building up the board early game is often very valuable, but converting that into damage in the end game becomes valuable later. So that, yeah, it's just something to kind of consider.
I tend to think upgrades. It's kind of how you mentioned that. It's really easy to think of it. Binds as really good if you get that first turn of the game and you're playing blue hero.
Sure.
And then as you get the second turn, then maybe it's not as good. Third turn, why bother? You kind of might go into that. But you kind of want to think of that upgrades too. Like if you get this turn 1, it's going to deal damage, and each turn it's going to subsequently deal damage. That's the way I think of it, at least. And feel free to disagree with that. But, that kind of goes into what I play is, how many turns do we have left? How much health do they have? What do I have? And how can I maximize my offering to the table?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and definitely cards are better early and late game. Like the ramp cards, like binds, are just so good round 1. And yeah, late game they're just a reroll. But yeah, I guess just for rerolls as well, like also maybe knowing how consistent your own dice are. If you're playing with like mega blasters that have lots of blanks, like maybe you just eat 2 damage in case you're gonna have to use that last card as a reroll, or what it may turn out to be like your last card at the end. Um, yeah, just I guess just weighing all these things because rerolls, like depending on the reroll, it can be 0 cost for like 6 damage, which is just insanely valuable. Um, so yeah, keeping that in mind as well.
Cool. So, going through those things, we're gonna kind of start to the wrap up phase. What are some final thoughts that maybe you guys want to impart to anyone watching?
Maybe I'll say like I guess the next tournament coming up is on Saturday. Like the for the release of High Stakes, and I think there's a difference between having like an established meta and a new meta. And if there's an established meta, then you maybe want to look for something that beats whatever's on top. Like I know for like Vader Terran, I was just worried about and I was worried about Trandoshans and like they're both 8 health characters and I looked at Terran, I'm like, well, he can deal 2 on activation a fair bit of the time and like, I just wanted something that could be really aggressive if it had to be. And and they could just tank and not necessarily like lose somebody to a Trando round 1 because they're high health enough characters, both of them. Um, so that was sort of the way I went on that release tournament. But I think right now there's, especially since Vader's going to be increasing in cost, there's not so much of an established meta. So probably you're just looking for whatever you think is strongest in a vacuum because there's probably something broken. Like by the time we move on to the next set, there will be stuff that's been like maybe broken's the wrong word, but a character who'll get their points increased, or maybe a combination of cards that will go on the restricted list. So probably right now, without an established meta, you're probably want to be combing through all the new cards and trying to see if maybe there's a character that seems, a little too good to be true, and it's true right now, but it won't be true a month from now. And or maybe just a card combination where there was a missed interaction where you realize it's really good, and by the end of the day, Saturday, it's going to be restricted, but you get to use it for this one tournament or whatever. So I think right now you're probably just looking for whatever you think is best in a vacuum without really worrying, I guess, about a meta because there's not such an established meta. So yeah.
I think I could go with a litany of things I imagine to recommend. So I'll kind of do a few rapid fire pieces on again that kind of touch on some mindset with some blends of tactics here and there, plus maybe a couple other suggestions. One is uh, one is definitely going to be you're going to need to play a lot. Like that's kind of an obvious thing, but hopefully you're motivated since you're already in the game and you're motivated to get better. You're going to want to play a lot anyway. So okay, you're going to play a lot, but how are you going to do that? Sometimes, well, find a partner. It's really good if you can find either if you have a team that you're on, or if you have a good friend or a regular night that your locals are getting together. And if you are fortunate enough to have a local community and you're about to start getting together in person again, that's great. Or if it's really just finding a partner on TTS to regularly play together, that's great. Then have a gauntlet of decks. So we've talked about you need to understand the meta. You need to understand that there are a bunch of different decks out there, and don't be afraid to copy. Right. So have a gauntlet of the best decks available to you. If you know what's tier 1, and you're trying to break through with a new concept or whatever, at least you better know if you can beat the tier 1 decks or at least have a shot against them. Sometimes you don't know if, and you don't maybe quite have enough time to, and you just to really get there, but you're going to do it anyway. Fine. If that's the case, then you need to kind of, in the same way that we theory craft decks at times in order to try and develop new concepts. You sometimes, and maybe I'll coin this phrase. You should theory play. Theory out the way in which like your strategy against a deck, especially if you haven't had the occasion to play it against it. You may need to think about, all right, here's what I'm going to encounter if I play this deck. Here's what I'm building into it or into my strategy in order to counter it. A final piece that I think that is probably not given enough discussion, frequently enough, is how to mulligan. Goodness knows, we all make a big mistake sometimes when we mulligan. I think that the best way to mitigate your own mistakes on mulliganing is, well, relatively speaking, it's theory crafting or theory playing for that matter. You kind of need to go into a match kind of thinking about, all right, what am I looking for? Did I get it in these 5 cards, and what am I gonna, how do I decide what I'm going to throw away and try again on? Because oftentimes we get like, oh well, if I discard this card that's suboptimal, I'm going to get something worse. Well, you know what? Maybe so, but if you don't always give yourself a chance to get something better, you're oftentimes putting yourself in a potentially negative situation. So sometimes it's just better to know from the outset what you're going to do if you get a suboptimal hand, and so that the decision is already made, rather than try to figure it out on the fly. A lot of people won't like this analogy, but I believe it was the New England Patriots who would often go into a game basically knowing what their first 15 plays were going to be, and they were not going to deviate from it. And I think that's an interesting strategy to take. And that kind of speaks to the idea of you need to be prepared going in with your game plan and stick with it. Don't necessarily try to invent it on the fly.
Yeah, that's a. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, knowing matchups is definitely good. Like if you're playing against an Akbar deck, like maybe you throw all 5 cards away looking for desperate measures if you have it.
Yeah, right.
That's
true.
Or if you're against the Dooku deck, like maybe you keep a bad card because you have to throw one away anyway. You don't want all 5 of your best cards. So.
No, I think you guys definitely hit it on the head with having a plan. One of my decks that I've had longest, I play the Fets a lot, and I know that deck. I know any card that I get in it, what I'm going to play. I'm going to play bounties or upgrades. I know what order I'm going to play them in. If I'm going to keep something, if I have the wrist laser, if I'm going to have to discard something, what I want to keep back. Regardless of what it is, I don't feel like I ever have to make a decision with that deck. It's ingrained in my brain already what I'm going to do, and that can be a little dangerous. If I teach myself something wrong, practice makes permanent, not practice makes perfect. But yeah, I think that you guys definitely hit it on the head, and I want to thank you guys for being here today. And that's going to wrap up our time. So I'm going to give a huge thank you to Vika and Norm for taking time out of their day to join us and give us a little bit of insight. And I'm sure they'll be around and ask them anything. All right. Thank you guys. Have a good one.
Thanks.